Hello, everyone. Welcome to our interactive roundtable, Logs, Love Them, Don't Leave Them. My name is Rachel Dines. I am your host and moderator for today's session. We have a fantastic roundtable for you today. So on to the show. As I mentioned, my name is Rachel Dines. I am the head of product and solutions marketing here at Chronosphere. And I'm going to let my fellow panelists come on and introduce themselves. So Bill, do you want to start?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Rachel. I should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Not sure where everybody is, but wherever you are, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bill Heinlein, and I'm the field CTO at Chronosphere. And I'm approaching what I think is month 2. Rachel might say it feels much longer, but yeah, a couple of months here at Chronosphere. Before starting here, I have about a 25-year career in a bunch of roles that include IT ops and engineering. And for the majority of that time, I've done something with monitoring or APM or observability. And for the last 17 years, I worked at United Airlines and was there as the director of enterprise observability in my most recent role. So looking forward to the discussion, one of my favorite topics, and looking forward to the questions too. But for now, enough about me. I'll turn it over to Alok.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Alok. I'm the head of product innovation here at Chronosphere. I've been here for about a year, just under a year, and I'm responsible here for our logging product that we announced in January this year. I have been in this space less than Bill, but quite a lot of time. So I've been in the logging space and the observability space for quite a few years across companies like Splunk and SentinelOne and so on with their SentinelOne's logging product. Off to Eddie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eddie Donnell, and I lead product management for the telemetry pipeline portion of Chronosphere. I have been here less time than Alok and slightly longer than Bill. And before that, I spent many, many, many years at VMware, becoming kind of an institution there. And I'm really excited to be diving into the observability space with both hands.
All right, thank you all. And wow, referring to yourself as an institution, that's pretty wild, but it's true story. So let's jump into the agenda here. We're gonna start with just a quick backdrop on what we're seeing in the market landscape. I think you're all here because you know you have challenges with log management. And so we're gonna talk a bit about what we're seeing in the market and actually share some recent data that we collected that I think will be interesting for the discussion. But then we're going to jump into the roundtable discussion. We're going to have some polls. We're going to have some debates. This is where things are going to definitely get interesting. So be ready to vote with your mouse clickers. And then we're going to we will give a quick overview of some of the product offerings and then into the lightning demos. So with that, on to the landscape and the challenges. I don't think I need to tell all of you that log data is growing at a massive rate. We're seeing, why is log data growing so quickly? This is something I see across all of our customers and many, many people in this space. Well, one, a big part of it is being driven by the move to microservices and containers, right? So much more data is being generated there. But there's also a lot of different constituents and stakeholders, right? From the development team to the security team to operational teams. They're all collecting the same log data, and then it's all collecting the same log data and then using it for different use cases when they could be doing maybe a more consolidated collection. Not only that, because of the many different teams and use cases, there's a lot more different tools. There's a lot more different places to route to, and there are a lot of different collection formats and types. And so this is getting incredibly complex. And of course, there's not a lot of standardization on standards. There's not a lot of strategies. And most of this data is likely not even that useful to you. And what we've seen in the market, we recently did a survey of about 120 engineers and engineering leaders in the enterprise space, and to ask them about log management and what was going on with them and their logs. And a few things that came to the surface that were really interesting. One is that there's been a 2.5x log data growth over the past 12 months on average. So some people were seeing like 10x growth. Some people were seeing less than that. But that means for most of you, if you used to emit 100 gigs a day a year ago, today you're emitting 250 gigs a day. So that's a significant amount of growth. And a lot of that data, like I mentioned before, is not necessarily all that useful. The next thing too is, speaking of the data growth, we found that 40% of the respondents were moving more than 100 gigs a day, and 20% were generating more than a terabyte a day. And I know I have personally seen people generating dozens or even hundreds of terabytes a day. I bet some of you out there might be even in the petabyte range. And then the most interesting thing too was the log collection format. So we asked people, what technologies are you using for collecting logs? And they could pick as many as they wanted. 71% of people said they're using more than one collection method. And this is just a quick word chart, what's the word I'm looking for? Chart showing how frequently people were saying, word cloud, there we go. Word cloud showing how frequently people were saying what type of, what the collection method was for them. So you can see it's all over the place, you know, from open source options like FluentBit, FluentD, Logstash, OpenTelemetry to closed source ones like CrowdStrike, even some Splunk options in there as well. So basically, not a lot of standardization and not a lot of consistency in addition to high growing complexity. So where does this leave us? Well, this leaves us with more data equals more costs. You don't need to be a genius to figure that out. And on top of that, it's more time consuming to manage and route all of these logs. So for example, I was working with one of our large investment bank customers that used to spend months, literally months, just to set up a single log integration from source to destination. It's like very, very labor intensive. And on top of all of this, we see that few people have a strategy when it comes to their logs. So they don't really think too much about like, what are we using for what? And like, what's the purpose of this? And I think I want to throw it over to Bill real quick to give us a real world example about this and how the lack of log standards and strategy and like, how has this impacted you in your past lives?
I mean, it's a great point to bring up. I think that you capture it right here, but when you think about the volume of logs that we all deal with and the varying sources of all those logs, the formats alone can keep an army of regex experts busy to get things moving in the right place, right? And all of that's necessary to get the right value, to get them in the right place. But you can't think about that when you're building the regex. You got to have a strategy that says, we're going to follow these formats. This is going to help us drive better insights. And oh, by the way, we need to make sure we're logging A, B, and C, right? So it's something to think about and not necessarily when you decide you need that army of regex experts.
Yeah, so true. I mean, and I think it's hard too to set a centralized and consistent strategy across a large distributed organization when every team and every developer and every group wants to do something a little bit different. Not super easy. So even just coming in with some intentionality about this is really I think one of the first key steps. So anyhow, long story short, we're all here because we recognize that something needs to change. We've come to a breaking point when it comes to logs. We can't just keep collecting more and more and more and more data with more and more and more and more different kinds of formats and expect outcomes to get better because they're not. So let's jump into the roundtable discussion where things are going to get more interesting. This is where I need all of you to get ready to vote. So we're going to field a couple of polls and have some discussion around them. These are anonymous polls, and so I'd really love for everyone to just click in and participate so we can have a discussion around what the results are. So the first question, which should be popping in right now, you should see, I want everyone to just take your best estimate about how much of your log data is actually useful. Is it less than 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%, 30 to 40, or 40% plus? How much is actually useful? And I guess I want to throw it back to you, Bill. What do you think is going to be the most likely answer that people are going to say here?
I don't know. It's a tough one. I think it depends on who's answering, but logs are super popular for a good reason. They provide context and color we all want during that 3 a.m. triage call that everybody loves. But if they're an app log that has a different format and maybe you're not the expert, or it's from something that I typically refer to as an appliance where you maybe don't have the verbosity you want, you don't always have the richness that is necessary to tie what you see in a log to what you see in observability tools. And so sadly, I give it less than 10%, but I'm optimistic that companies who think about the logging strategy we just talked about could get it to 40+%.
Wow, less than 10%. So that means you think 90% of people's logs are trash.
I mean, that's a tough statement, but it is, it depends on the log again and who's looking at them. But if you think about it, lowest common denominator, if everybody has to understand what's going on in the log to make it valuable, then it could be a challenge.
Wow. Okay. This is a strong opinion here, and it looks like we've got a good number of people voting, but I'd like to see a few more people voting. And while I give you another chance to do that, I'm curious, Alok, if you can chime in on this, because we had an interesting chat the other day about, the waste that people find in logs and how you distinguish between them. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about like what causes waste and things like that. So, there's a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to over summarize and really say the one big reason there's waste is just because there's a lot of them and you don't know what you're always looking for. Simply like architecture has gotten way more complicated. There's a lot more data out there, infrastructure logs and also custom application logs. I mean, the sub bullets there are like custom application logs. Oftentimes are just verbose. It's an engineering team writing a bunch of logs. It happens. It is very easy to log things. There's not, if there's, as Bill said, if there's not good logging practices in an organization, there's not a lot of incentive for the engineering team to be careful about those logs, etc. So they can get out of control really quickly. They provide a lot of value for those engineers, but not all the engineers, a small section of the engineers who are using it. So they can be very verbose and there can be a lot of them. And then the second type of waste is just pure waste. There's actual literal waste. There's white space, duplicates, punctuation, stuff that adds no value to the actual troubleshooting process, but is there. And there are ways to reduce that waste. The first one is probably better logging practices. But there's also just you can get rid of info level logs. You can do those things, and some organizations do, but some don't. And that is one way. It doesn't have to change your strategy. And the other one is you can use things like pipelines, or sometimes your logging tools have capabilities to actually say get rid of waste. You can do sampling, etc. Sampling is a bit more tricky. People are a bit more hesitant to do sampling, but these are simple ways without having to change your logging strategy to sort of get rid of that waste and reduce that volume.
Yeah, that's great. Very like tactical, straightforward advice. I feel like everyone could take this forward. All right, I'm gonna give everyone 30 more seconds before we look at the results because they are not what you might expect. Last chance. And all right, let's end the poll and look at the results. So none of you thought it was less than 10%, like Bill predicted. Looks like most of you believe that you're in about the 20 to 30% range of actually useful log data. Here's the thing. So that's good on the one hand, right? Because it's better than our pessimist in-house us thought. But that also means that 70 to 80% of the log data that you're collecting is not useful, is waste. And I'd be curious to talk a little bit about trends in this. And this actually gets into one of the questions that we got that from one of the audience members that I want to talk to. But panelists, and actually everyone in the audience, do you think this is getting better? Is it getting worse, getting better, staying consistent? Drop a note in the chat just to tell me what you think. And then I'd also love to hear from Eddie. Like, what's the latest on this? Are we getting worse? Are we getting better?
I think that the problem that we fundamentally see is that the amount of logs grows at a different rate than the value of logs. That is, the value of logs grows arithmetically. It's like, oh, it increases a little bit every year, plus. But the volume of logs is growing geometrically because you have so many microservices, because you have so many different components all generating logs, and that's growing in a totally different rate. One of the jokes that I like to have about this is that, even if you think that only 10% of logs are useful, Bill, figuring out what those 10% are in advance when you're not actually in the troubleshooting, like that's the impossible dream. Is like, you know that there's 10% of them are useful in there, but figuring out what those 10% are before you're actually digging through in the 3 a.m. triage meeting, that's the impossible thing.
It's so true. I mean, if I can only wave the magic wand, right? It's like the 10%, like, sure, for the one person who thought 40% or more are useful, that's amazing. But like, do you know which 40%? It's a great question. And it leads me into one of the questions that we got from the audience. I thought this would be a good moment to pause and discuss, which is, how have you seen challenges in log data management evolve over the past few years? And Eddie, you talked about microservices and containers and that kind of driving some of the challenges here. Does anyone want to chime in on that question?
Well,
I'll-
I actually want to expand on that just for one more second. I think that's part of why you've started to see the emergence of telemetry pipelines is the sheer volume that's starting to be generated of logs is like, hey, we've got to be able to do something with this. We have to be able to manage this more effectively. So that's one of the big evolutions that I've seen in industry kind of around this space.
As the chief pessimist officer, I'll chime in here and say, I think that when you think about logs 10 years ago were written by people who were going to look at them, and not everybody looked at them or even knew where they were. Now the content of logs is looked at by a lot of people, and if you're not the expert in the app or the infrastructure component, whatever, then those logs don't provide a lot of value to you. And when we think about observability, I think companies will do best if they think about observability for all. And providing the color and the context, or as my good friend John Potokny says, logs are like the glue of observability, right? And so if that glue isn't strong, then you're not going to be able to paint that nice picture, and you're going to spend a longer time on that 3 a.m. call. So that's the reason for my pessimism. I don't want to paint a picture that all logs are garbage, because they're not. It's just the way we've looked at logs over the years is changing. We've gone from, I've got this log over here in this directory that people don't really know I'm writing it to it's going into these telemetry pipelines where everybody can look at it, and context is important.
Yeah, I don't mind adding to that actually, Rachel, if I can.
Please.
I think there's a couple of things I've seen. So I've actually been in this space, logging space, for very, very long as a vendor most of the time. Eddie touched on one main point, which is there's just you don't know what you can, you don't really know your log data. So telemetry pipelines have really started taking a stage. Pipelines have always existed. Logstash is a pipeline. Telemetry pipelines, though, are much easier to use, easier to play with, easier to deploy, etc. So they achieve your use case of controlling the data much better than using something off the shelf. So that's one major thing. But also keep in mind, logging itself has become commoditized. Way back in the time, there was Splunk. It was the best product out there. But today it's commoditized. So in some ways, the challenge has been dealt with by more vendors in the industry, creating better products, pushing down prices, offering more feature sets that allow you to control that data. Some do, some don't. So that's one vendor way that I see the industry has changed, and that has helped in the cost part of log management over the few years.
Yeah. No, that's all great points. And there was another great point in the chat too that I wanted to call out, in that the ability to correlate log data with metrics from other monitoring tools is key to gaining a holistic view of system performance, which is, I think you're right. We're looking at trees and there's a forest here, and like logs really don't stand alone. They need to stand with, metrics, events, and traces. And so it's a fantastic point. So thank you for chiming in the conversation. I'm going to move along to the next poll question, which is about predicting the future. So everyone get out your crystal ball. And once again, just using your best guess, what do you think the future state is of logs as it relates to observability and troubleshooting? So as we mentioned earlier, we use logs for a lot of things. We use logs for security, for observability, for operations. But for observability in particular, do you think it will increase in importance in the next 1 to 2 years, maintain the same level of importance, decrease in importance? Are you think it's going to decrease so much that you think you're going to phase out logs in the next 1 to 2 years? Or do you think you're going to phase out logs at some point, but you don't know exactly when? Alok, I'm going to throw it to you again. What's your take on this?
I mean, it's a tough one. It also depends on which customer you speak with. In the monitoring space that I see, there's also different industries that care differently about logs and what their expectations are. If you talk to a security operator, there is a much higher dependence on logs for everything, significantly higher. So if you look at the monitoring space, I think the one thing of interesting trend I'm seeing, and I don't think this is a 100% trend, is certain customers have told me we are going to move away from logs completely. I think that's an extreme statement. I don't think they mean it quite as much as they say it. I don't think that's easy to do, but I have heard it. And so there's this, let's move towards traces. But so I think there's just like this desire to move away. It's not always a strategy to move away. There's not always I don't think there's a groundswell desire to move away. It's administration teams or stakeholders who worry about the cost of logs. That's where it's more coming from. And so that's one thing that I see. I do see that therefore the growth of that dependence on logs will go down. It won't go away, but will go down.
I think, Bill, you might have a bit of a different point of view on this, or maybe not. Maybe it's the same.
No, I agree. I think it's the answer is it depends, but I do think logs are here to stay. I think that the value of logs is dependent upon the organization's ability to control their content and make sure they're enriched and that they can be correlated well. I think that, if I think about what my workflow has been in observability, it's always been to look at traces and metrics first, but logs always provide that great additional context, especially if I know nothing about an app, which is often the case for a central observability team who's just trying to jump in and help by being experts in a tool, right? But if I can look at an observability tool, look at a trace, see that there's something going on, and then look at that and a few log entries that are well correlated because their rich data allows that, then I can help find things much faster. And frankly, you make a support option really scalable for a large enterprise because people don't all have to know everything about every app all the time. They just need to be experts in a tool.
Yeah. That actually links back to one of the interesting questions we got in the Q&A panel that I want to talk to, but I want to give everyone 30 more seconds to click a button, and because it looks like most of you have voted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the poll. Let's look at the results. So about a little more than half of you think that logs are going to stay about the same, right? Next 1 to 2 years, not going to drive any kind of level of importance change. What I think is interesting here, though, is there is a group of you that do think you're going to phase out logs. So 17% think you'll phase out logs in the next 1 to 2 years. Another 11% think you'll phase out logs, but you don't know when. And I guess my question is, how do you get engineers to stop writing logs? Or maybe you don't. Maybe they still write logs and they just go off into a black hole.
Well, and I would add, there are logs that are going to exist that you have no control over. Whether you choose to ignore them, I guess, is one thing, but I don't know that you'd want to. But logs from your infrastructure, logs from, things that back to the idea of appliances. There are appliances in your environment that operate as black boxes. You're not going to have a lot of visibility into, but you're going to want a little because they're going to be important to the big picture of a trace or, a span of that trace, right? So I think they're always going to be around in some way, shape, or form.
Yep. I mean, I would agree with that. I think what's interesting though is there's a very mixed bag, I guess, right? Some people see 28% of you see this increasing in importance, which is very interesting. And I think if your logs are going to be a bigger part of your observability strategy, you definitely need to find a way to get to what's useful and what's not very, very quickly, right? Because as we can see, log volumes are growing really, really fast. This is a little bit of a left turn, but I think it's kind of a good topic to hit on a bit right now because you just mentioned some of the centralized teams. There was a question earlier that I thought was a really good one, which was, can you discuss the trade-offs between centralized versus decentralized log management approaches, particularly in terms of scalability and performance? And I thought, Bill, you probably have some strong thoughts on this one, if you don't mind chiming in.
Sure. I think that you've got to, as an organization, you got to think of where you put your work, right? Whether you're a big or small organization, you don't want to spend a lot of manpower doing useless things, right? Multiple tools that do the same thing aren't always a good idea because they can tend to create rework, and you're using engineers and developers to do things that are not as valuable as creating a product that makes you money. And so centralizing things like logging, to me, makes sense. Again, larger, small organization, because you're taking something that can provide value and making sure it does provide value, not add burden. So that's my take on it.
Love it. And I saw a few other comments too in the chat too about connecting data to the broader context of what's happening in real time is essential for getting meaningful insights, making informed decisions. So this helps us get the full picture, react promptly to changes and trends as they unfold. So the real time, I think that is the key piece. And also someone else tags in that log structure, as log structure increases and is more contextualized with more useful metadata, then they become more useful, which is very good and a very good segue, I think, to the next topic that we want to discuss. Also, trace and span data logs and traces all start to blur, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So yes, really interesting discussion here. I feel like the answer is like, it's no clear answer. And so that makes things always more exciting for me. All right, on to our third and final poll. Time to answer it. First, the question is, how do you route logs? Do you use open source routing methods like the OTel collector, or FluentBit or Logstash or Kafka? Do you use like a built-in collector from a commercial off-the-shelf vendor like Splunk forwarders? Do you use a totally third-party telemetry pipeline like Cribble? Or is there just not really a consistent or unified strategy? Everyone does it a little bit different. While you are exercising your fingers, clicking around, I want to talk a little bit about telemetry pipeline space because it feels brand new. Like it just came out of nowhere. Like we weren't talking about telemetry pipelines 4 or 5 years ago. Now I feel like a lot of people are talking about them. And so Eddie, I wanted you to give us a quick history lesson on how this space has evolved, how it came to be. Where did it come from?
It really did kind of come out of nowhere, which is sort of how everybody feels about it. Like, oh my gosh, there's this thing called the telemetry pipeline all of a sudden. But it emerged from the fact that we are generating more logs from more places in more formats than ever before. I have talked to customers who are storing their logs in databases. I've talked to customers who are storing their logs, in raw files. I've talked to customers streaming their logs, and pulling things from Kafka and so forth. So like there's a whole bunch of different sources of logs because application topologies and application architectures have changed. And so instead of having one big process that does everything, or even a small number of processes that do everything, now you've got dozens or hundreds of processes, and each of them generates a sort of baseline amount of logs no matter what you do. And so, you've got microservices that's going to generate a metric ton more logs than monolithic applications are. And so as these application architectures evolve towards that kind of modern world, that's what's basically going to end up happening to your logs. They're going to explode in terms of volume and in terms of complexity.
Yeah. I mean, and it underlines like this is why telemetry pipelines exist, right? To help with both of those problems. And what's interesting is that Gartner said that by 2026, they expect 40% of log telemetry will be processed through a telemetry pipeline product. Which is an increase from 2022 is the last time they made this prediction, 10%. So 10% in 2022 of log data is processed through a pipeline, and they expect that to be up to 40% by 2026. So let's see how that compares to how you all voted in the poll. So I'm going to give you another second. It looks like not everyone's voted yet. Don't be afraid to say you don't have a consistent strategy. I expected that to be the most common answer here. Give you another one last chance to answer the poll before we push it live. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see the answer. Okay, so looks like a little less than half of you are building the built-in collector from your commercial off-the-shelf vendor. That is what, I don't know, for me, that's what I expected. And I'd be curious to throw this over to Eddie to get his point. 24% are using a third-party telemetry pipeline. Like that's a decent number. And then an equal 24% are also using open source routing methods. And you saw from the word cloud earlier in the presentation that the open source solutions were the most common, right? The FluentBit, Logstash, OTel were the most common ways of collecting data. So Eddie, what do you think about these results?
I think these are really interesting. I think that I agree with you that it doesn't entirely surprise me that folks are mostly using, I have a log backend vendor, like I'm going to just use their tooling and adapt with that. But I think there's opportunities here, particularly with the third-party telemetry pipeline and the open source methodologies to start to operate things in a little bit more efficient and more flexible ways over time.
Yep. Yeah, and I see a comment too that we're migrating to OTel, not there yet, but beginning the journey. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I think a lot of people are in that spot. OTel, obviously really powerful solution, strongest in traces, decent at metrics, has a bit of a way to go for logs in our experience. But great comments on this. I'm loving, I can't even keep up with all the questions in the chat, and there's more questions coming in. Don't worry, we're going to answer more questions at the end. So keep asking your questions. But I think for now, I'm going to move on to the next section of our presentation, which is, gotta move this. A quick commercial, because I see a few of you asking about Chronosphere, and so we've probably piqued your interest enough talking about all these topics to who are we, what do we do? And so this is where we're going to do a little bit of show and tell. Hopefully this will be interesting, and then we'll answer more questions at the end. So keep your questions coming in. So who is Chronosphere? Chronosphere was founded by our two folks who were originally running the observability team at Uber back in 2014. And back in 2014, Uber was a really early adopter of what we would now call, cloud native, containers, microservices, and the like. This was back before Kubernetes was even a glimmer in anyone's eye, or just barely a glimmer. And what they found was they could not find observability tools that would work for them at the speed and the scale and the complexity that they were operating at. Because it was, massively different running in containerized environments versus VM-based environments. So they built some of their own tooling in-house. They realized, oh, wait, the whole rest of the world is also going this cloud native route. Maybe other companies need this solution too. And they left and they founded Chronosphere. And so we offer two products. The first at the top you can see here is an observability platform. This is just a full service end-to-end SaaS observability solution that can ingest metrics, events, traces, logs in virtually any format, open source preferred, but also in proprietary formats as well. And this is all focused on powering engineers through the observability lifecycle, right? From knowing about a problem, getting an alert, to triaging it, exploring through dashboarding and tracing, and then getting down to the root cause analysis, probably through the logs. And then our second product that we offer, these are two completely standalone products, is the telemetry pipeline, which is a completely vendor agnostic solution that ingests your log data, transforms it, and routes it to the back end of your choice, whether that is to Chronosphere, back to Chronosphere logs, or to a completely different log solution altogether. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each one of these, starting with the telemetry pipeline. Eddie.
Awesome, thanks. So fundamentally, there are a few things that the telemetry pipeline problem space or that we attack in this problem space. The first is what we sometimes like to call the Tower of Babel problem. You have a whole bunch of different formats and a whole bunch of different sources coming from one side, and you have a whole bunch of different destinations that expect a whole bunch of different formats potentially on the other, and you need some way to translate between them. You need some way to move from one to the other. You need to move across those two things. But the second thing that I think is perhaps more important as you're moving things from a number of different data sources to a number of different destinations is that you can transform and enrich those logs along the way. So as was mentioned earlier, you may have context at the time the log is being written that would be incredibly difficult to reconstruct later. Like, oh, right now this particular metric is above 90%. Boy, it would be interesting to decorate the log with that additional information on its way to the destination, so that if I needed to go back and look at it an hour later or 2 hours later or a day later, I had that additional information associated with it. I might also want to reduce the amount of logs. Like maybe I don't actually need to store every time I write an HTTP 200 in my log. Maybe I just need to generate a summary that says, here's all of those things. And I'll show a little bit more about that in a demo in a little bit. So I want to be able to enrich the logs. I want to be able to potentially transform them and so forth. And the last thing that I think is useful to know is that we're building all of this on top of FluentBit. So because we're building on top of FluentBit, we're building on top of a solution that has been downloaded and used over 13 billion times. We like to joke that it's a little bit like the old McDonald's hamburger signs, like billions and billions and billions served. This means that it is running on top of some of the most rock solid battle-tested software that's out there. It's incredibly performant, it's incredibly efficient, and it's a Kubernetes native solution. So anything that you can do with Kubernetes, your horizontal pod auto scaling, or your automatic load balancing, or your self-healing if one of the nodes goes down for some reason, all of that stuff comes for free as part of building and designing in this way. So that's a high-level overview of what we do with the telemetry pipeline.
Great. I'll jump into Chronosphere logs with control. So I run this area of the product line, the Chronosphere logs, as I said. Control, when I say control here, is a feature of our logging offering as part of our observability platform. Keep that in mind. Control here is built on top of everything Eddie just talked about, the telemetry pipeline. So when I say control, it is a subset of capabilities of the telemetry pipeline. Under the hood, it is a telemetry pipeline. Intentionally, we want it to be the same. We want it to work the same. We want it to behave the same. The user experience has a lot of similarities intentionally. So control here is specifically targeted at customers who have only the needs to move from one observability product, whatever you may be using, to us. And so when a customer does not care about the full-fledged features that Eddie talked about, they can choose this control feature as part of logs. If they do care about the full-fledged feature set that Eddie just spoke about, the multiple destinations, all the transformations and reductions that you get, they can always buy this telemetry pipeline in conjunction with Chronosphere logs. So control here specifically is targeted at those who say, I don't need all of that, I just need this bit. And that bit is the following. Just like the telemetry pipeline's control for logs can ingest data from any source, but it will allow you to send data to only Chronosphere logs, additionally an option of an object store to manage your costs. We have almost all the transformations and reductions that the telemetry pipeline has, with a few exceptions where we won't let you use things like converting data to an OCSF format and things like that. Now, if you have a need for all these, the telemetry pipelines is the better option for you than control for logs. So that's how to think of it. It depends on what you need, and you can mix it with our observability platform as you need. It is based on what you need, and we've got the product packaged and at the price points that you care about. There's a couple of questions here about, I see questions coming in, so I'm going to roughly answer a few of them quickly. Everything here, when I say control, everything goes into a Chronosphere logging product. We announced that at the beginning of the year, but it's a fully featured, highly scalable, highly performant logging product that can take up to terabytes and terabytes and terabytes and up to petabytes of data per day. So it is really performant, very snappy. I won't go into all the performance characteristics. It has all kinds of retention periods that you can want for data, so you can choose different retention periods, even including long-term retention if you so want, up to a year and things like that or more. So it is a fully featured logging product that we offer as part of our offering. We're not talking about it today. I'll quickly demo it, but we're not going to go in depth today. But that may answer some of the questions at a high level across the, do you have a logging offering for Chronosphere? So I'll hand that back to Rachel now.
Thank you. So just to summarize, when customers work with us, whether they're using the telemetry pipeline product or the logs product as part of the observability platform, two big benefits they see. First is reducing cost of log data. Typically, we see customers cut their costs by at least 30%. That can definitely be higher than this. It depends on how aggressive you want to get. One of the customers I was working with recently, a large commercial bank, they reduced their Splunk bill by millions of dollars. That was, once again, in a short period of time, something they were able to do. I think they could probably even go significantly deeper. On the streamlining operations side, this is where you can really save a ton of time from collecting and routing logs and transforming them. If you have logs in tons of different formats, which likely you do, that's okay, right? You can help reduce that operational burden. And similarly, that same bank that reduced their Splunk bill by millions of dollars, they are managing 20,000 plus FluentBit and FluentD agents in the field. So also the fleet management side of it can help reduce the operations. And the customer I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, way back before all these other doofuses started talking, they were said it took them months to set up their pipelines. Well, now you can do it in minutes, and I'm going to prove it in our lightning section. And I'm sorry I called you all doofuses. You're all wonderful, and I'd love to pass it back over to Eddie to to do a pipeline demo, and I saw there was just a question about how much we can customize, and I think we're going to answer that.
Yeah, we are, and I answered it also in the live thing. So we'll do both.
Wonderful. All right, so lightning demos, that means they get about 3 to 5 minutes each to show us as much of the product as they can and keep it exciting and interesting. Eddie, you're up first.
All right. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a quick pipeline. We're going to do a really simple demo here that's just going to take a pipeline that creates mock data, sends it to standard output, so that you can see how this works. You can see that if I'm receiving data, I can use things like a load balancer, which automatically does the load balancing for you, or I can do something more Kubernetes native like cluster IP or node port or what have you. So let's go ahead and start that. So I'm going to start with a source. Here I can see the agents that I can receive from, including obviously FluentBit and FluentD, but the Splunk Universal Flow Order, Splunk Heck, Beats, Logstash, OTel. I can scrape Prometheus metrics. I can go pull from a variety of SaaS APIs further down, or some cloud sources, some cloud services as well. Rachel, I think that things got stuck there, though. Oh, there we go. Okay, never mind. So you can see, the bunch of different sources. So like I'm going to choose mock data here. So I'm going to choose a simple message, hello. And from the destination side, we'll add a brand new destination. So again, just like sources, I have a whole bunch of different options here. I can send things like standard output. I can send them to an observability backend or a data backend or a SIEM or Google, AWS, pick your services, etc. In this case, I'm going to use standard out just so that we can show the demo here. And we'll have automatic load balancing, we have automatic healing, and so on. And of course, I can customize all of that kind of functionality as well. All of what you're seeing here is, of course, also accessible via API and CLI. So throughout, as we go through things, if I want to use configuration as code, I've got this capability here to be able to integrate with existing tools like GitHub Actions and Argo and so on and so forth. And I can also add things like lookup files or parsers or functions and secrets in here as well. So I'll that has some particular uses as you may see in a little bit later on. So when we go back to the pipeline here in just a second, let me get back there. We can look at what it's doing and how it's running. So what we're doing now is we're loading the logs that we auto-generated, and you can see some metrics about the pipeline itself, and we're pushing out these messages that just say hello, right? Very simple. We're publishing these messages from the mock data, we're sending them to standard output. Really super simple. But let's do something interesting with them. Let's do some processing so that we're not just looking at hello a bunch of times, we're looking at some additional data. We're going to go back to the pipeline editor here. And you can see that I have two places, or you'll be able to see as soon as this finishes loading, that I have two places that I can do editing. I can do it on the source side and on the destination side. Like a firewall, I can do processing rules on inbound and outbound. So let's start processing on the source side. This is the processing UI, and it lets us see the input, the lines there, and then the output. If we click run actions, and you can see that just by default, we create a little bit of structure in JSON format. The log key basically takes each line and says, here's what the log was, and it goes into this line here as well. But let's do something a little bit more interesting than just lines that say, each line number as we go. This is the default there, but let's put something more interesting in here, like 450 lines of HTTP access logs I have. So we've got a whole bunch of these. I'm going to add a new action here. And remember how I mentioned earlier that it might be really interesting to be able to say, hey, let's not look at anytime I see an HTTP 200. We'll take that out. But it's important to understand that there are two kinds of things that I can do inside of processing. I can either process individual records, that's enrich them, remove them, add things to them, And we'll see a little bit of examples on that. But the other thing that I can do is aggregate them. And I'm not going to show that right here, but I can bring those together into a whole bunch of things. So you see here, I've chosen to remove anything where it's an HTTP 200. I can choose what my regular expression here is if that's something I care about. I'm going to run that. And you can see that immediately I have knocked from 450 down to 49. That's an 89% reduction in the total data volume just by saying, every time something went fine, I don't want to store the logs a bunch of times. So that's pretty awesome. But these raw messages are unstructured, and I want to do something about that. I'm going to add a parser to this. So we're going to use the source key of log, and I've got my HTTP parser regular expression in here. Again, I can change the regex engine if that's something that's important to me. And I'm going to paste in that regular expression. And now if I run this, what we end up with is structure in that log. So we've taken the raw log string and we've put some structure around it so that it's easier for us to read for that 3 a.m. wake up call when we're trying to figure out what's going on. Now let's see what we should do next. Let's take out that log line, the original raw log line, because we don't need that anymore now that we have the structure. And you can see that there are a whole bunch of other additional things that we could do here. We could block keys, we could block whole records, we could do multi-line joins to bring things together and so forth. In this case, I'm just going to flatten the subrecord down so that we remove some unnecessary nesting. And you can see that what we end up with here is now we've gone from a bunch of raw unstructured data to much more structured data that we can understand more easily when we're going back and looking at it. And we've reduced the total volume of the logs by quite a bit. But we can also do some more fun stuff, like we can profile this process as well and see how long does it take to run each of these things. And so each of those is how long does it take to run each of the rules, the actions that you have there. So you can see, for example, that the block rule took 1.4 milliseconds to run. You can see that the parse rule there took 1 millisecond to run. And so on and so forth. And this lets me understand, like, what are the more performant logs and performant rules and so forth as I go through things. And so when I think things are good, I can go ahead and apply the processing rules. And now that processing rule has been deployed and I've got it set to go. So there's my Lightning demo.
Very nice. Snaps. Very exciting. That was great. You showed a lot in a short period of time. Hopefully you're all able to follow along and get ready because here comes Alok.
Cool. Thanks, Rachel. Everyone hear me? Okay, great. Took myself off mute. So I'm going to show you Chronosphere logs. This is where the logs end up. So whatever Edu showed you was how those logs get processed or reduced or things like that, whether you're using logs of control or the full pipeline. That's roughly the experience you'll get regardless of which product what you buy. Those logs end up in the Chronosphere logging product. This is what it looks like. Here I'm on what I'm going to show you is two portions of it. One is how we integrate the rest of our product, not just logging itself. So the first bit is actually how we go from services to logs or tracing to logs. So you're going to see that. And the second bit is how you go just the logging experience itself and how you can slice and dice data with a search explorer view, that kind of stuff. So I think the recording's about to get where I need to go. There we go. So I'm clicking here on the billing service. I'm not looking at it from the logging perspective immediately. I can look at my metrics. Very Lightning demo, so it's pretty quick. I can look at my metrics, see what's wrong, look at my traces if I want, but I can also look at my log data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the log link over there. That'll take me to the logs related to that specific service. That's if you're looking at it from the perspective of the service. You can also have these from dashboarding to logs. So you can have metrics dashboards that show you. So here's a list of the logs that are specific to the service. I can see a bunch of payload rejected logs. These are all demo data, so they are very much designed to look nice right now. But that's really how it works. It's very simple. It links into those logs, it maps those services, and it creates that view for a user who says, tell me what I should care about. Here, I can do additional things like tail1. It's a function that just produces all the logs to just show me the one top log in the entire thing, reducing the amount of stuff I look at. This is me jumping into traces now. So how do I go from the trace explorer view? So I'm again troubleshooting, maybe I got an alert or something like that. And I'm jumping from traces or metrics to traces to logs. So I'm jumping here from traces to logs. The nice thing about the tracing link is I can make a custom link. So all these links you see are custom links, but they're persisted for your environment the moment you make them. So we ship with a few, but you can also add many, and you can have any sort of parameters to this custom link. And it opens up in our UI, obviously, because logging is ours. So here I'm going to click on logging by trace ID. You can do span and trace ID if you wanted, but that was one in our demo right now. So you can see how the trace ID from that specific trace is now populated into this query using that custom link that you'd have to create at least just once. And then it shows you all the logs for that specific specific trace or related to that specific trace. Very common use case if you're using both tracing and logging. And so that's two examples of how you connect the dots within our product, how this becomes a unified platform. Now I'm going to jump into how logging just works. If you're just using logging and you jump into logging and you want to just mess around with the data and you want to search for stuff, here's an example of me here as I was recording this building some searches. So here is the most simple way to log is full text search. So if you're not comfortable with query language, the nice part of this product is that it supports full text search. You can type anything you want with wildcards. You don't have to know the fields, etc. If you do want to do stuff with fields, you can type something more like this, where you can say service is equal to error. You get these autocomplete experiences. And then you can, start narrowing down your data. There's all kinds of different filtering you can do. This is just a very basic view of it. And you can do things like all kinds of stuff like time chart or group by. Here's a group by example where I'm grouping all this data by environment. So I want to see all the errors for that service by environment. And you can see how that generates a table. And then that allows me to see that in different visualizations. So this is a bar chart that shows me that this particular service has many, many more events that have error in it. So many more errors for the prod environment than staging. And that's a way you could slice and dice your data. And then you can add this to dashboards. You create custom dashboards. So I try to answer some of those in the questions that came in. But that's roughly the quick view of the logging product. Back to Rachel.
Amazing. Thank you. And we did just get a comment that said you didn't answer the question about practical limits in terms of scale that the platform can handle and talk about data archival. So can you cover both of those questions real quick, Alok?
Yes, practical limits are pretty high. So there aren't like very specific practical limits in terms of scale. But I would say this product can handle up to several hundreds and terabytes pretty easily. So that means if that's the volume you're generating, nothing to worry about. You get in the petabyte scale, you start hitting those practical limits. Petabytes per day, I'm saying, not per month or something like that. Hundreds and hundreds of terabytes per day. In terms of what was the other archival. So there are three things the product can offer you, or our overall offering can offer a customer through logging. Within the product itself, you have several different retention periods. So you can just send the data to Chronosphere logging, and we can retain it for 7, 15, or 30 days, your choice. And then you also get the additional choice of long-term retention. So you pay differently for complete long-term retention. You don't have to move your data around if you don't want. You can have that all be in one place. The additional option is that you can choose within the product to say after 30 days or 15 days or whatever it is, archive this data to my S3 bucket. So you can then archive it from there to the S3 bucket. And the final option, which is in tandem with the telemetry pipelines, you can say things like, I have my primary Chronosphere logging store, and I want to store XYZ data in there. And I also have my object store. I'm going to use the telemetry pipeline or control to route certain data always to the object store. And sometimes I'm going to pull that back in and analyze it in my primary logging store. So that's another way to manage cost and archive data or have different retention periods or cost tiering of storage. And I hope that answers that question.
I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, then chime back in the chat. But that brings us to the Q&A section. I want to open it up to audience Q&A. I mean, as you've been asking questions throughout the whole presentation, so it's been really fantastic. I'm going to go through and we'll answer as many as we can right now. While I give everyone else a chance to put in any last questions, quick lightning round. I want to hear your most extreme opinion that you have or you have heard about logs. Bill, you get to go first since I haven't heard your dulcet tones in a minute.
I thought you were going to say dull tones. I would say, as much as this bucks the trend, you don't have to log everything. Log what's important. And if everything is there, make sure that it's rich.
Eddie, I see you itching to jump in.
My hot take is a small one, which is that events, one of the 4 pillars, like that events are actually just log lines in disguise, and you should just think of them that way.
Alok?
It's not so much my opinion, but something I've heard from vendors. You don't need logs at all. And I've heard that from some vendors, which I find very extreme. And doesn't play out that way either. But that's the one.
That is extreme. And I'll share mine real quick, which was the head of observability at a large video streaming service once told me, if you have to go to the logs during an incident, you've already lost. And I said, woof. So, okay, with that, so there's lots of questions about Chronosphere, and I think we won't get through them all, but we'll follow up with you if we don't answer your question today. The first one I thought was an interesting one, which is, how does Chronosphere handle scalability for large and rapidly growing data volumes in a cloud native environment? And I thought this was interesting because this is really our bread and butter. I mentioned that the company was founded by the engineers at Uber. On the metric side, we have customers with more than 1 billion time series. We can ingest millions of data points per second. And on the trace side, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head what the tracing volume is, but one of the ways we can do this is with a single tenanted architecture. So it is a SaaS solution, but it's single tenant, and that means no noisy neighbors, high levels of performance. And we've also spent a ton of time tuning the whole solution for high levels of performance. I don't know if either you want to jump in on any more questions on the scalability side.
No, but you just answered also one of the other questions about what security measures are in place to protect the data ingested and stored, is that single tenanted architecture really gives you some really strong walling off between customers.
Indeed, yes. That while we're talking about any other on the security measures, any other commentary from you, Eddie or Alok?
Not specifically. I mean, we support all the data at rest is very secure. Data in transit is highly secure. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the product. That it's a very battle tested logging product that we have, and it is very, very secure for all practical purposes.
Nice. Okay. I think we are, maybe we can take one more very, very quick one, which was, let's see. Well, gosh, it's hard to pick. What can we answer? What features are available to help reduce alert fatigue and ensure alerts are actionable and relevant? That's a really good question. And we didn't even talk about the alerting side today because we typically talk about alerts in context of metrics, right? Metrics or traces, which wasn't a deep area of focus for us today. We do have the ability to group alerts, so you don't get the same alert coming through 1 million times, and also give the ability to do things like snooze alerts, or what we call them mute them, or I think of it as snoozing my alarm clock. There's also a lot that we're doing on the developer experience side to help make it easier to quickly find and surface the key insights. So when you get an alert, you can get a lot of context with the additional events that might have caused the alert to fire. So there's a lot of cool stuff there that we don't have time to dig into. So I'd love to follow up with you if you have additional questions, because I think we are pretty much right at the top of the hour. So I would like to say thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Thank you so much to my friendly fellows who came along, Bill, Alok, Eddie, and thank you all for who participated, shared, asked questions, made comments, voted. This made this for a very interesting session. As I mentioned, we are going to send out a recording. If you have any more questions we didn't get to, you want to have a deeper conversation, I think you should know where to find us. And thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day.